So all politics seem to begin in women's wombs, if I can dare make that statement. That is the desire of our patriarchal capitalist power structure to control women's reproductive capacity, our capacity to birth new humans. This capacity, this power has been used against us for many millennia by male supremacist or patriarchal societies, and in my opinion is a source of female oppression. And the decision whether to bear and birth children needs to be ours alone. Now we are in big trouble. It's been less than a year since the Dobbs decision came down, and the landscape in this country does not look good for women. 13 states have completely banned abortion. In Missouri, Texas, Tennessee, South Dakota, and Oklahoma, there are no exceptions for rape or incest. And some bans have been stopped or blocked temporarily by state courts, so there might be even more coming down the pipe. Recently, there's been an attack on medication abortions, which represents half the abortions that take place. Wyoming is the first state to specifically ban the abortion pill. And in Texas, there's a very frightening case being decided right now by a conservative judge, challenging approval of mifepristone, which is one of the drugs that is used for medication abortions. And then we have the cooperation, the shameful cooperation of corporate America like Walgreens, refusing to provide abortions or abortion medication, even in states where it remains legal, just caving into threats by attorney generals. Even though it's legal, they don't want to provide the medication abortions. And there is the ongoing threat that abortion will be banned on a federal level. So we're facing a nightmare out of The Handmaid's Tale that a lot of us are still shaking from this came to pass. And that is that women will need to seek dangerous back alley abortions, especially young women who don't know their options or have no resources, women being imprisoned for every suspicious miscarriage, and doctors, friends, and family members who assist a pregnant woman also threatened with being targeted and treated as a criminal. So this is very serious. How did it come to this? We're asking ourselves. A lot of us have been, old timers have been at it for a really long time fighting for women's rights. It's not because most people don't support abortion rights. 61% of voters still favor access to abortion. The Democratic Party sat on this issue for many years, despite multiple opportunities to codify Roe when the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency, yet they did nothing. And now the Women's Health Protection Act that would codify Roe is stuck in the Senate. Abortion rights were whittled away slowly from day one, once Roe v. Wade came down, starting with the Hyde Amendment, with little pushback, little fight back. In the 1980s, there was some fight back. There were several huge marches for women's lives. I remember organizing one in San Francisco of like 40, 50,000 people that were quite powerful and slowed down, I think, the erosion that was taking place. But then since that time, there really hasn't been anything near what we need in terms of mobilizing women. So what strategies do we have for fighting back? So I'm going to say a few things that I think would be helpful to grow our movement, to make it powerful and effective, and to win back the rights we were lost and continue to move forward to the full meal of women's liberation, which we never were anywhere near winning. So we need to first remember our history. How did women win the vote? Did women win the vote by depending on politicians? No, they did not. It was a person like Alice Paul, her militancy, her independence, against the Wilson administration in the middle of war, when that was not, you were not supposed to protest anything during World War I. That militancy made a huge difference in putting suffrage over the top. And how did we win abortion rights in the first place? It was the radical feminists on the ground, particularly in places like New York, that had a huge impact in raising this issue, first getting abortion legalized in New York and then winning Roe v. Wade. The radical feminists of New York stormed a legislative hearing in New York on February 13th, 1969. They were having a hearing on abortion where the only witnesses were men and a nun. And those were the witnesses. And so the women disrupted the hearing and said, hey, we're the experts. We're the real experts in this issue, and not this panel. The women engaged in, I'm gonna let Kathy in, yay. Women engaged in consciousness raising, in women-only organizing, and in speak outs where women who were openly saying about their abortions, which was a crime at that time. So basically they're publicly admitting committing a crime, and yet they did it, and these were very powerful events. And they changed the tide. Then there was the momentous protest that I will never ever forget, because I was there, on August 26, 1970, where 40,000 women marched in New York City for abortion rights, equal pay for equal work, and free childcare. So it's basically, three main points. And that was incredibly powerful. I was then personally involved in a group called the Women's National Abortion Action Coalition. This was before Roe still, where we had a conference of 1,000 women. It was women only. We had speak outs, and we had protests and marches on Washington. And people are pouring in still. So Roe was not a gift from on high, from some judges, and at that point, all male judges. It was from the kind of pressure and the organizing that was done on the grassroots level that changed the whole conversation in this country. And that's how we won the rights in the first place. And the way we won those rights are the way we're going to get them back now. So certain things I think we can learn from the experience of the women's movement in the past, and also all social justice movements, and that is the importance of grassroots organizing and alliance building. We need to learn to work with people we disagree with on other issues. That's extremely important, because in unity there is strength, and if we divide up into little groups, we're all going to be very ineffective. So it's very important that we learn to work in alliances. And I think we had a successful recent experience where I got to know Andrea really well in San Diego, where we had a candlelight vigil. We got a lot of press coverage, and it was, a very good event, a good step forward in trying to organize locally on a grassroots level for feminist work. And we hope that that will continue. So some other things I think are important is the framing of abortion as an issue of women's rights. And I lost my job over this, but I sued my employer. That suit is pending. But I think it's really important to frame abortion as an issue of women's rights. Imagine trying to fight against racist police who are killing Black people disproportionately, targeting Black people, racially profiling Black people, but being forbidden from using the word Black. That would definitely undercut the ability to organize against racism. Same thing with abortion. Abortion bans are the epitome of sex-based oppression, and we can't fight them effectively if we can't mention our sex, the things we have in common, and to avoid terms like people with uteruses. We are not disembodied body parts, but female humans, whole people. If abortion rights is for everybody, then do husbands and boyfriends have an equal right to decide? I would say no. Abortion is about women, about female humans exercising their rights over our ability to bear children. And I wanted to just, if I can screen share here, I'm going to try, and if I'm not, I'll just talk about it. Okay, let's see if it does it. Okay. There's one. Here we go. And can you see it? Did that work?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let me see if I can move this down. Oh no. There we go. Okay. So this is from NARAL. And I'm just going to read just a little bit of it. This is from the NARAL website. Freedom is for everybody. Reproductive freedom is for everybody. It's a fundamental American value. Everyone should be able to determine if and when, how, and with whom to start or grow a family. And then it says, there's a, I'm not sure where it is here, talks about pregnant people, protecting pregnant people from workplace discrimination. So there's no discussion about us as a sex being oppressed based on our sex. That's disappeared from this piece here from their website. So I'm going to stop sharing this and show you a different approach. Let's see if I can do that. No, wait a minute. Okay, here we go. I think this is it. Okay, so this is a statement by Rise Up for Abortion Rights, which is a grassroots radical abortion group focusing on abortion rights. And they use these green bandanas that are connected with the women in Mexico who were fighting for abortion. It's kind of an international symbol. Now, and so here, this is completely framed as women's oppression. Now is the time for everyone who believes that women and girls are full human beings, not incubators, to act to prevent a great horror. And this was written right before the Dobbs decision came down. And the attack on abortion rights is part of a patriarchal Christian fascist program, and talks about tightening the chains of both white supremacy and the subjugation of women. And then it says forced motherhood is female enslavement. When women are not free, no one is free. So this is really different from what the language you're seeing in NARAL. And I think it's just really important that we talk about our oppression as women. That's how we won reproductive rights. That's how we won anything that we won so far, was to talk about women's oppression as female humans, and how we need control of our bodies. We need, equal opportunity in the workplace, a lot of things that we need based on our sex. And then another point is the interconnectedness of feminist issues. We need to rebuild multi-issue feminist movement from the bottom up. And Wendy's going to talk about the ERA, which that's her area of expertise, but the ERA is really important to reproductive rights and the struggle for equality between the sexes. We still have much discrimination out there, women excluded from the trades, unequal pay, with women making 82% of what men earn, and even far worse for women of color. So we have a very long way to go, and we need to see it as a package of the key demands of a women's liberation. Male violence against women is as pervasive as it's ever been, and that needs to be named as male violence and fought. We need sex-based affirmative action, conscious sex-based remedies to allow for real equal participation in every aspect of society. We need lesbian rights and our same-sex attractions and relationships respected. And we need women-only spaces, programs, and organizations. We should have a right as the oppressed sex to self-organize like every oppressed group should have, and to define our own needs as women, as female humans, and those rights to be respected. We need social support for the traditional caring work that women have done, caring for the very young and very old. And childcare, which was raised in 1970, and we haven't gotten very far at all with that. Free childcare and elder care, paid family and parental leave. We're the only country in the developed world which denies paid family and parental leave. And we need an end to the double day for women. And women are still burdened, financially dependent on men, and burdened with all the caretaking work, or most of the caretaking work in the world. So basically, to fight for abortion rights, it's all interconnected with the continuing the unfinished business of women's liberation. We have to fight for younger women and future generations. Younger women are not doing, the youngest women right now coming up in the world are not doing very well. There's historically high levels of depression among young girls today, and really high experiences of male violence at very young ages, teenagers I'm talking about. And it is depressing. I'd be depressed too. So we need to create a world where persons born female are proud of their femaleness, love their bodies, and we appreciate the strength and power of their bodies, aren't held back or kept down because they are female. And that they are given the same opportunities, dignity, and respect as their brothers receive. And just to end with a quote from a suffragist, Christabel Pankhurst: remember the dignity of your womanhood. Do not appeal, do not beg, do not grovel. Take courage, join hands, stand beside us, fight with us.
Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Andrea. Maybe you can pronounce your last name for me, because
Yeah, that's okay. It's a difficult one for some. Gabay, like
Gabay. Okay, Andrea Gabay. So she is a grassroots activist who began in 2020 in New York City and worked on environmental campaigns associated with New York City and promoting a healthy environment. She also supported marches in New York City for Black Lives Matter, and also the Women's March in Manhattan. When she came to San Diego, she organized a march rally in January 2023 as part of the National Women's March, and she was also involved in our the vigil that we had here in San Diego a few weeks ago for International Women's Day. So go take it away, Andrea.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you all for being here and, gathering and being involved in these discussions, because these are super important. Like Anne's talked about, comes from the ground up so that we can continue to fight these issues, continue to spread this movement. So I'll start with, we've got a lot of milestones, a lot of good things and a lot of ongoing efforts by women's rights activists throughout the years, throughout the decades. But gender inequality, discrimination continue to be these significant issues in many parts of the world, especially here, including the wage gap, our lack of access to education, healthcare, and gender-based violence, especially male violence against women. So we're gathered here today to talk about one of the most controversial and divisive issues, which is abortion. And it's unfortunate that, women like Anne, that we are still fighting for this today. It's like you think it's like it's 2023. Why haven't we codified this already? And for me, this is a deeply personal and complex issue that, affects many, and it has been debated for decades. And typically this debate surrounding abortion rights centers on a lot of the two main perspectives of pro-choice and pro-life. Those who are pro-choice, as we know, believe that women should have the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, while those who claim to be pro-life are under a guise of they have a misguided sense of morality that they push onto us. These GOP lawmakers undermine and ignore the fundamental rights of women. When they're talking of pro-life, we need to also discuss maternity leave, strict gun laws, housing crisis, foster care system, and innumerable systemic injustices that plague the country. All of these issues are closely tied to quality of life. And so when we talk about that, those are the issues we need to be focusing on, not controlling women's bodies. So we all kind of remember the story back in July. A 10-year-old rape survivor from Ohio had to travel state lines. And amidst all her trauma, just to have an abortion procedure, she had to travel all these lines just to have a procedure that most likely saved her own life. And in November, a Texas woman almost lost her baby in her own life due to just vague issues around the law. And she quotes, "These politicians are not pro-life. And, what about me losing my life and my child is pro-life?" So as a pro-choice advocate, I believe every person should have the right to make, their own choices about their bodies and lives. This includes the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion. Women are capable of making the decisions for themselves. And fundamentally, the core of these issues seem to be, again, about controlling women's bodies and hearkening back to the days in 1847 when the American Medical Association, again, a group of mostly men, moved that they should be the ones to control women's decision on abortion, that they should be the ones to say yes or no. And of course, they mostly said no. Now, what does that sound like to you? Something very similar to today. Again, a group of men who are trying to pass laws on women's bodies for things that they should not, be controlling and should not have the right to choose for. So our pro-choice movement is not about just promoting abortion, as we know. It's about promoting our right to choose, to ensure that women have access to safe and legal abortion services, as well as these comprehensive reproductive health care, sex education, and contraception. It's largely a public health issue. So when women are denied these basic healthcare services, they're forced to resort to unsafe and illegal abortions, which are very dangerous and even deadly and detrimental to their lives, of course. According to the WHO, the World Health Organization, abortion is a common health intervention, and any unsafe abortion is a leading and actually very preventable cause of maternal deaths and morbidities around the world. So again, this lack of access to this safe, timely, and affordable procedure is critical to public health and a human rights issue, and something we need to push forward as well. We also believe abortion's a matter of social justice, right? Women who are poor, people of color living in rural areas are often the most marginalized, and they face the greatest barriers to accessing these healthcare services. So by denying them access to that abortion, we're perpetuating these systemic inequalities and denying them that basic, human right to make the choice about their body and their lives. And then furthermore, outlawing abortion would disproportionately affect especially low-income women and women of color, like again, I said, who may not have access to these already. And that's why funding to organizations like Planned Parenthood is super important. And perhaps most importantly, our pro-choice movement is about women's rights. We trust women to make the best decision for themselves, our families, and we trust women to know what is best and to be responsible and thoughtful about their own choices. But how can we do that if we don't have the choice in the first place? Now, I want to talk about some future points. I've got 3 in mind. Anne mentioned a lot of these things. So there's a lot of things going on with abortion. First is the Texas mifepristone case, which is the common abortion pill. As we know, Judge Kaczmarek, who was appointed in 2019 by Trump, he has longstanding ties to these conservative religious groups, and he has even made, he didn't make this case public, or he didn't let the hearings be public until days later. So these hearings are very limited, and it's something we need to be pressuring them about. And it's no accident that this complaint was filed in Amarillo, Texas, where, the plaintiffs know they have a sympathetic ear in Judge Kaczmarek. And so this is a very important decision that's going to affect, on a federal level, what's happening to this pill, which many use for abortions. And I think an important quote that I saw from one of the articles was that, Eric Baptist, who's the lead attorney for, the right group, any relief you grant must be complete. When Judge Kaczmarek was asking them whether they were open to maybe just a middle ground of pausing it until they could relook at these laws, even though it's been proven. FDA has proven that this is a very good pill that has worked. So the harms of these abortions, he says, the harms of these abortion drugs know no bounds. And this leads credence to the possibility that, of course, he doesn't want just the middle. They just want to ban it completely. And for what? We don't know what it's completely unreasonable. So I think one of the things is to continue to pressure these politicians to keep these public access hearings open, to continue to pressure them and know that we want this pill, we want access to this healthcare. Number 2 is talking about what Anne also mentioned, Walgreens, unfortunately bowing to pressure, from economic pressure especially, and and political pressure from Republicans, nearly 24 Republican state attorneys wrote to Walgreens in a threatening legal action if the company began distributing, the mifepristone drug. And of course, they bowed down to this pressure. And thankfully, California, has ended their $54 million contract with Walgreens which was great on Newsom's part. But what's unfortunate about that, as Anna had also mentioned, was that this list includes several states where abortion in general, the medications are legal, including Alaska, Iowa, Kansas, Montana. So they're not able to access it, even if it's legal there. And again, these are about pressure. It's about signing a lot of our, a lot of these petitions so that we can continue to tell our local legislators, tell our local state council, hey, we want this, and continue to fight for others who may not have this access as well, so that they know we are all in support of each other. And number 3 is the upcoming Wisconsin election and the importance implications of that. So it's Janet Protasiewicz versus Daniel Kelly, and Daniel Kelly is the conservative part of that. And Janet Protasiewicz, hopefully we are hoping that she can win the seat so that it comes from a 4-3, conservative majority to a more, liberal side. And so that Protasiewicz has also been the one to be in support of overturning that 1849 ban in Wisconsin, which is something that would be really great, and to keep this movement going forward. So, if Kelly is elected, that abortion ban is going to stay on the book. So it's important this election that we move forward, that we pressure, and that we kind of help Wisconsin with maybe these calling banks. That's something that I've continually helped out with. So it's going to be really important this upcoming election in April. So in maybe a week or so. So what do we do moving forward? Like Anne said, I totally agree that we need to continue to protest, to show up from the ground up. That is where the movement will become strong, is that we continue to show up to these things. So a lot of people actually are not, aware of these issues, even though you might think like, hey, everyone must know this, right? Not everyone, when you show up to these protests, everyone kind of sees, hey, what's going on there? What is that? I've had a lot of people come, and a lot of my friends who I thought were more involved with this sort of thing, when they see what I'm trying to build here, they question, they ask about it, and then it provides, it gives coverage to issues like this and shows that we think it's important, that people need to know more about it, and it has them look at these issues and that they may not have been aware of before. Signing petitions, again, getting that to legislators, continuing to check your emails, check on that, sign them. There's also a lot of those things where you can sign, and also personalize your message to your state offices and stuff like that. Again, demanding that the pressure to codify Roe with the Biden administration and ratifying the ERA. So I implore everyone again to take a stand, sign those petitions that get out, call your local politicians. That's something you definitely can do, and something I didn't even know before I started doing social activism. You can call them and let them know, hey, this is something that's important to me. This is an issue. We need to fight for abortion health care for women, and tell them how serious we are about these things. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is going to be Wendy Murphy, and our last speaker. And she is an impact litigator specializing in women's and children's civil liberties and constitutional rights. She won the landmark Title IX cases against Harvard Law, and Princeton. And also she sued both the Trump and the Biden administrations in federal courts to advance women's rights. She also won landmark cases to improve privacy rights for women, crime victims, and also rights for the disabled crime victims. She's adjunct professor of sexual violence law and law reform at the New England Law in Boston, where she directs the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project. And she is also well known for her legal advocacy in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. So go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A, so I hope I'll be fast, although I fear that I will not. So give me one of these, Beth, if I keep going.
Okay, you've got 15 minutes.
He's asking for,
Yeah.
trust me, I
he's
can keep
asking for the
talking
hook.
3 hours without taking a breath, and I really apologize in advance for that. I'm going to be the uber radical here tonight. Well, it's tonight for me, and say that we would be naive to think that either political party gives a damn about women. They don't. They absolutely don't. Equality is the most important issue for women to establish, and abortion is often used as a ping pong ball to make women chase their tails and run around wasting their resources and energy, thinking that if they only vote for the Democrats, boy, then we'll have our rights protected. It's all nonsense. Neither party cares about women's rights at all. And abortion as a distraction from the real issue that matters most, which is constitutional equality, is a tactic that's been around for a very long time. One thing I don't want to encourage people to do is to focus on these state ERA lawsuits. You probably know that about half the states have state ERAs, and some abortion lawsuits since Dobbs have been filed in certain states for the purpose of winning state law decisions protecting abortion rights despite Dobbs under the state constitutional ERA. I want you to really know this forever and ever. State ERAs are worthless unless they are rooted in a guarantee under the federal constitution that those state ERAs will be enforced equally when applied to women. We need to understand this. We are wasting enormous resources fighting for state ERAs, even though of the half of the states that have state ERAs, more than half of those interpret their state ERAs to permit second-class treatment of women. Why? Because they're not because no state is required to interpret their own state constitution, much less their state laws, to treat women equally, without all of their laws, including their state constitutions, being tethered to a federal constitutional mandate that they treat women equally and ensure women's equal protection of all laws, including abortion laws. So how fundamental is the ERA to this fight? It's the only thing that matters. It's not just important, it's the only thing that matters. Everything else is busy work. And don't take offense, because this isn't personal. This isn't personal. When you heard Ann talk about Alice Paul, she said the same thing about voting rights. She said, don't talk to me about any other issues. We are laser focused on voting. We are nonpartisan. We are non-political. We are non-corruptible. You can do anything you want, but don't waste my time talking about other issues. We're going to win the right to vote. Once that's done, we're going to win equality under the Constitution. And then all sorts of other things can happen. But until those two things are in place, don't waste my time talking about other issues. And I guarantee you, she would have said this about abortion. She would have said, don't waste my time on abortion because equality matters most. And I agree with her. Now, having said that, I do want to talk about why abortion I don't want to talk about why abortion is so important. I think that we have to not waste energy or time talking about getting Congress to codify Roe, because they don't have an authority to do that. This is such a distraction. Well, let's all vote for Democrats and maybe they'll codify Roe. Number one, they didn't when they had the power. So let's remember that. Number two, they don't have the authority now. Without some constitutionally based decision from the Supreme Court or a constitutional amendment giving Congress the authority to codify something about abortion, they can neither affirm it or ban it. Once Dobbs came down, Congress lost the ability to do anything around abortion. So please, let's not waste our time. And please don't take this personally if I disagree with you. I just have such strong feelings about not wasting time and resources because I'm old and I don't want to die before we get shit done. So what I also want to say, which is going to sound a little crazy, but please bear with me, is that both parties, again, know damn well that controlling women's lives is essential to the massive amounts of wealth they have accumulated as men and continue to accumulate as men. If we maintain women's second-class status under the Constitution and if we control their reproduction, the profits that come from that control continue, right? So what I'm going to tell you is that when Roe was decided in 1973, and when Frontero, which some of you may have heard of, maybe not, but when Frontero versus Richardson was also decided by the Supreme Court only a few months later, both in 1973, those cases together, though we celebrated them, were designed and intended to undermine the ERA and prevent its ratification. Remember, the Equal Rights Amendment, which simply says equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The ERA passed Congress in 1972, and along comes the Supreme Court with these propped up cases. And make no mistake, cases get propped up for a reason. They don't just land there. They decide Roe and Frontero. Roe was an abortion case. Frontero was a 14th Amendment equal protection case. By deciding them at the same time but separately, they were declaring to us that moving forward, abortion would not be seen as an equal protection issue. Scandalous, scandalous. And both sides did this, not the Republicans. Both sides agreed to separate abortion from equal protection, which was devastating, because it already created this sense that abortion was somehow not a women's issue. Abortion, and Roe versus Wade in particular, should have been decided under the Equal Protection Clause. It was not. When Roe was decided, it was a celebrated case. As some of you know, it was also a criticized case because it only gave women power over their bodies for the first trimester, and then it gave basically doctors enormous control over what women could do with their bodies afterwards. But it was still better than what we had. And it also was subjected to strict scrutiny analysis because the court said abortion was a fundamental right. Well, it doesn't get better than that. When something is a fundamental right, that's as heavy as a right gets. And when it bumps up against something else, it crushes it. Fundamental rights are the best. And when strict scrutiny is applied, it means the states can barely do anything to touch abortion rights because fundamental rights are so important that states can't pass laws to encroach upon them. We were delighted to get such a strong legal standard of review. When Frontero came down 3 months later, again, I told you it was an equal protection case, the Supreme Court of the United States gave women full equality subject to strict scrutiny review, which means that we don't need the ERA. Now that's interesting, isn't it? We had just passed the ERA. It was before the states for ratification. We only had 7 years to ratify. And here's 1973. The Supreme Court gives us 2 cases that essentially make the ERA meaningless. So what did that cause? This is really important. What happened after Roe and Frontero? The states stopped ratifying. They stopped ratifying. I think a handful of states after Frontero ratified. There was one in 73 after Frontero. We were going like lightning speed getting states to ratify from the moment in 1972 when the ERA was passed by Congress. The states ratified like crazy. As soon as these cases came down, they stopped. Why? Because when women went to the states to say, please ratify, the state said, well, you don't need the ERA anymore. You've got protection for abortion at maximum legal standards of protection. And you've got Frontero versus Richardson giving you strict scrutiny. What else do you need? The ERA wouldn't give you anything more. And guess what? Women had nothing to say because they were right. We had won the 2 big kahunas. And we now couldn't make a strong argument that was politically embarrassing to the states that were saying, we're not going to ratify. So states stopped ratifying. That was the purpose of Roe and Frontero. That was the purpose. Now, what happened after it was clear the ERA would never become ratified in time before the deadline? The Supreme Court ruled in Boren in 76. Oh, we didn't mean to give you strict scrutiny. We're going to bump it down to intermediate scrutiny, second-class citizenship. And what happened in Casey on abortion in 1992? We're going to bump you down from fundamental rights status and strict scrutiny to just a due process interest and an undue burden test, kind of akin to intermediate scrutiny, actually. And both of those cases together meant that states could now encroach, burden, oppress, discriminate. You see what happened? It was, here's everything you want. And as soon as the ERA died, They took them away. And that's where we stand today, except that things got much worse for abortion, as we all know, after Casey, because of Dobbs. We now have nothing. We don't just have a crappy second-class standard called undue burden. We got nothing. Pregnant women are not persons with rights under the 14th Amendment anymore. That's where we are. But when you think about how we started and why the politics of those two cases in 73 were, why the politics of those two cases matter, we can begin to see the problem in a different light. Then it doesn't become who should we lobby and how should we organize and who should we protest. It becomes how do we play their game? How do we play their game better? This is serious stuff. This is far more complicated than who do we vote for? Where do we march? So the kinds of things that I'm concerned about are why is it that we've just accepted what Alito said in Dobbs, which is that pregnancy and reproduction and abortion, well, he didn't really say it about all those things. He said reproduction, and in that case in particular, abortion is not a sex-based characteristic. Why did he say that in a throwaway sentence in Dobbs? Why? Because, and by the way, I don't agree with that, and lots of scholars don't agree with that. Of course, pregnancy and abortion and reproduction are sex-based. Not just, it's so obvious that it's embarrassing that the Supreme Court of the United States would say in a throwaway line in such an important case that abortion is not sex-based. It is quintessentially sex-based. However, the case the court cited in support of that, which is called Geduldig, is from 1974. It had to do with whether a California company could discriminate against pregnant women by not treating them as, giving them disability benefits because of their pregnancy. And, you know, there was this lengthy discussion about why pregnancy was not a sex-based event. And it was this: not all women get pregnant, not all women can get pregnant, and men can't get pregnant. Plus, because men can't get pregnant, we can't do that similarly situated analysis. So there can be no discrimination because there's nothing we can do about the fact that men can't get pregnant. To me, the Geduldig case is where we ought to focus some energy in order to reverse that silly notion that pregnancy and abortion are not sex-based. They clearly are. So let's say one day we win that. And that's certainly something I'd be happy to do as an impact litigator, design cases to challenge Geduldig. And there are lots of scholars who think that's something we should do as well, because it's so absurd. So if we can bring abortion and equal protection together, we still end up with what? Crappy equal protection treatment because we don't have the ERA. So even if we can undo Geduldig, we end up with abortion being subjected to second-class standards. Right now, we got no standards, right? Rational basis, crappy nothingness. But even if we can get it up to where women are in the 14th Amendment, we only get this crappy intermediate scrutiny standard. So what I want to emphasize about the value of the ERA is this. We got to deal with Geduldig for sure, but we also have to get the ERA done because it doesn't care whether all women get pregnant, some women get pregnant, men can't get pregnant. It doesn't care about that because the ERA would allow us to argue disparate impact harm. You can't do that under the 14th Amendment currently, but you could do that with the ERA in place because the ERA is not the 14th Amendment, it's its own amendment. Currently, Supreme Court jurisprudence and federal court cases are clear that if you only have the 14th Amendment on your side, and you have to deal with this problem of we can't really make a good argument about sex discrimination because, you know, men can't get pregnant and not all women get pregnant and all of that stuff. Your best argument is always, well, it doesn't matter because it affects women disproportionately. Almost exclusively, it affects women. This, you know, the regulation and these characteristics of pregnancy, this is all about femaleness. So, you know, if we're gonna win a 14th Amendment argument, we got to be able to make a disparate impact claim, and we can't. We can't because the 14th Amendment doesn't allow it, but the ERA would, because the language of the ERA is more akin to the language of civil rights laws. And guess what? Civil rights laws allow disparate impact claims. So the brilliance of the ERA, just on that practical level of with the ERA in place, we can start attacking Dobbs by making disparate impact claims. Even that alone is reason enough to focus our energy on getting the ERA done, getting women's equality established firmly in the United States Constitution, so that, number one, no state can do anything harmful to our abortion rights. And the federal government would then obviously have more authority to regulate if we wanted to, and if the right people were in office, and if that mattered to us, it would give Congress again the power to do more that we need them to do. So I hope that's clear. I think it's a little complicated, but I hope it's clear. The only other thing I guess I wanted to talk about was the notion that, politically speaking, we need to think differently about how our country is functioning. As I'm probably the world's biggest Alice Paul fan. Am I done? Am I done?
Pretty much. Yeah,
Okay.
you're at 15 minutes, but if you want to say something short to wrap it up, that's fine.
I'd love to
Yes,
hear
I'm
it.
just going to say this one thing. Thank you so much. So I'm a huge Alice Paul fan, because not only was she responsible for women winning the right to vote when we did, we fought for the right to vote for decades, and Alice came along and said, the problem is the two-party system. Neither of them want women to have the right to vote, and she was right. So she created first a union, and then when that became corrupted by women who were partisan, she created the National Women's Party and said, we are nonpartisan, we are incorruptible, and we're going to hold both sides accountable. And it was so genius. She created it in 1916, and 3 years later, Congress passed the Women's Suffrage Amendment. So to me, we have to extract ourselves from this two-party system and be very unapologetic about it. We have to create a kind of women's union for equality. We have to be a one-issue union. We don't have to be a party. We don't even have to raise money. We have to unite as a 167 million group that we are, a group of people that we are, and leverage our millions of votes against both parties. You do the right thing, get the ERA established, and we'll vote for you. You don't, we won't. There's so much power in our numbers. We don't have power in money, and we never will. We'll never have the right amount of money to get anything done. We will have the power in our votes only if we unite and be fierce, incorruptible, and nonpartisan.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to say, I think because a lot of people are off screen, it might be easiest for people to raise hands, and then I'll call on people. The raised hand is if you press the reactions button, there's something that says raise hand. So I can see you from the participants list. I was just wondering before we start that, Anne, would you like to say anything about FIST?
Oh, yes. Somebody else is joining us kind of late. Yes, Feminists in Struggle has been around since 2019. We're a national radical feminist, multi-issue feminist organization. We're grassroots. We're fight for everything from the ERA to abortion rights to spaces and women's right to self-organize. And we recruit. So we'd love for women to join us. We have a special deal right now. If as supplies last, I've got a bunch of leftover t-shirts that are similar to what I'm wearing. And if you join, and it's on our website, feministstruggle.org. If you join, we will give you a free t-shirt. So this is really nice. People see it. Yeah, there we go. So anyway, so encourage people to join our organization. We're trying to build a grassroots movement. We're starting to build chapters like we're starting to do in San Diego, of activists and women who want to create an independent women's movement to go all the way this time for full women's liberation.
Okay, great. Carol, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for your presentations. I wanted to ask Wendy if she would, and I totally agree with you, as I think most people on this call know, the ERA is paramount for us to be able to fight for any of our rights. I was wondering if you could brief everyone on where we're at with the ERA right now, because some of the people may not know that it's already been ratified by the 38 states, but it's being fought by the Biden administration. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, so there's a long story and there's a short story. And if you're interested in the longer story, please send me an email. It's wmurphy@nesl.edu. And I will send you what I call my little book. It's about 80 or 90 pages with 380 footnotes. It's about the history of the ERA. And it's the long version. The short version is that we finally got the last necessary state to ratify in January of 2020. Trump was in office at the time. We knew that there might be some questions about its validity because, as you know, there was a deadline attached to the ERA, and January 2020 was many years after the deadline expired. So I filed a lawsuit in Massachusetts federal court. And after that, the last 3 states to ratify, led by Virginia, which was the last of the 38 states, they filed a lawsuit in DC federal court. We both made the same arguments, which is that the ERA is valid and should be published in the Constitution as our 28th Amendment, because the deadline is invalid. It's unconstitutional. We both made the same arguments. I had an Obama appointee Black female judge for my case, which felt good at the time. The DC case had a Puerto Rican Obama nominee judge. In their case, they felt good about that. I lost miserably. And the DC case, they lost even worse than I did, because they actually got a vicious anti-equality decision from their judge. Mine just dumped my case on standing grounds. And our lawsuits were aimed at the United States archivist, meant to compel him by mandamus action. And also we had a declaratory judgment claim, force him to publish the ERA, because we had satisfied Article 5 of the Constitution, which has only 2 requirements. Congress proposes, 38 states ratify. That's it. The amendment becomes law. This nonsense about deadlines, it isn't in there. And our argument was that deadlines give too much power to the national government, because Congress can add a long deadline to something it doesn't like. It likes, and a short deadline to something it doesn't like. And it basically gets to completely control when our Constitution gets amended, which denies the power of the people. We speak through the states. It denies the states the ability to have an equal voice in the amendatory process. So that was our argument. We both lost. My case, I appealed to the First Circuit, an en banc appeal. I appealed to the Supreme Court, nothing. The DC case was delayed for political reasons and kind of used to make, make women vote Democrat. But what I want you to know more than anything is that in 2020, when I first sued, it was the Trump administration. Women were told, "Oh, vote for Biden because he and Harris love the ERA, and he'll get into office and he'll tell the archivist to publish, and we can dismiss our lawsuits." So we all vote for Biden. Well, I don't know who you vote for, but we were told this is a good idea. Vote for Biden. He said he supports the ERA. He gets into office and he not only does nothing to tell the archivist to publish, he files the same briefs against me in my case and the same briefs against the states in the DC case, making exactly the same arguments that Trump had made. It was really repulsive and heartbreaking. But that was also very enlightening, because for those of us who care about equality, we now could see in black and white terms that neither party is actually sincerely interested in ensuring women's equality. In the first lawsuit I filed, I was representing Equal Means Equal and Cam Lopez and everybody. And then when that case failed, and then the DC case, they just got their decision a month or so ago, they lost terribly too. But in the meantime, I have organized 3 other state lawsuits to be filed. So we are now in Michigan, Rhode Island, and New York. We've filed lawsuits against those Democrat attorneys general in those states, saying, you have publicly declared that you believe the ERA is valid and you want women to vote for you because you say you support the ERA, but you've done nothing to bring your state into compliance with the ERA. So is this a bunch of political rhetoric, or do you actually support the ERA, and do you actually believe that it's valid? These were 3 states where the attorneys general said publicly, the ERA is valid. The ERA is valid because the deadline is not valid. So we sued them and said, okay, here you go. How come you've done nothing to bring your state into compliance? And it's been very interesting to see their reactions, because they don't want to admit in these lawsuits that they don't actually support the ERA for political reasons. So they're hemming, filing cases, filing briefs in response, trying to say, well, of course I support women's equality, but it's complicated, blah, 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 blah. So if anyone's interested, I can send you the link to the oral argument in the Michigan case, which is the only case where we've reached the stage of oral argument. We don't have a decision yet. But my feeling is that if we're going to be able to continue the fight for the ERA, it's not going to happen in federal court. We've had the most liberal judges in federal court crush us, and we lost. So the only hope for me is that we get in front of a little bit, I don't know how to frame it, but in front of state court judges who are less subject to influence. Perhaps they feel more liberated to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, if we can get state courts to rule that the ERA is valid, then we've got a battle. We've got a federal court saying it's not valid, state court saying it is valid. That's the kind of controversy that can lead to a momentous decision, because it could end up before the United States Supreme Court, at which point women, I believe, will unite and fight for the Supreme Court of the United States to make the right decision. And we can literally become mobs at the gates. I'm not sure the Supreme Court will ever rule in our favor, but it's our only hope at this point, short of starting over. And I'm not starting over because I'll be dead before anything happens.
Well, Wendy, one follow-up question. You said recently that this is not a left-right, the ERA is not a left-right issue. It's a states' rights versus federal rights issue.
Yep. That's why I just framed it that way. Yep. These state court lawsuits are now going to bump up against the 2 federal lawsuits that we lost. And we're hoping that at least one of these state court judges will do the right thing. And then we can at least argue, look, we now have a competition. The states say it's valid. The feds say it isn't. Who's right? And then the case will have to get resolved by the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court doesn't want to touch this, believe me, they absolutely don't want to touch this. They would like to continue to perpetuate women's inequality. And I say that about all the justices. Remember, in the Dobbs case, if you read the dissenting opinion, which was by the liberals and the women, most of the women, they didn't even tell the truth about women's inequality. Their dissenting opinion is kind of hurtful the way they wrote it, because they purported to tell the history of women's struggle as second-class citizens. They never mentioned intermediate scrutiny, never mentioned the failure of the ERA, never said women remain second-class citizens and the ERA is necessary, said nothing, absolutely nothing. But we shouldn't be surprised, because again, and I keep saying this, neither party actually wants women to have equality. They just want to create the appearance that there's a debate between the sides about it. There isn't. And if you get my book, if you read my book, you'll even see how Ruth Bader Ginsburg participated in killing the ERA and did advocacy work that actually weakened women's rights while claiming publicly that she was doing things to support us. My piece that exposes her for what she did won't be shocking to most scholars who know how awful she was to us. But now we need to think, why does she get propped up the way she does? Why is she propagandized as such a hero for us, even though she did harm to the ERA, even though her work undermined the ERA? And when she had a chance to write her opinion as a Supreme Court justice, and I'm talking about her work when she was a lawyer, then she gets rewarded, she gets a judgeship, she goes to the Supreme Court. She now has an opportunity to write her opinion. Does she think women deserve strict scrutiny and full equal protection rights or not? And she said, no, women deserve second-class status. That was her opinion in the Virginia case in 1996. The truth came out. And when my case was pending, she spoke at Georgetown Law School and said the ERA is dead. People need to start over. I'm like, my case is pending. How dare you, as a Supreme Court justice, say publicly the ERA is dead and we have to start over? I have a lawsuit pending and it might end up before you. You're not supposed to talk about cases that might end up before you. I was devastated. Know that about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Don't follow the propped up heroes. Use your own mind.
Oh, Fran, do you still have a question?
Fran,
Fran?
you're on mute, Fran. Oops.
She's on here twice and now she's on here
Kathy,
once.
Kathy has her hand up.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I was muted. One thing and another.
Yes.
Okay. Can I go now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Excellent presentation. I thought Anne's summary was terrific. I'm so glad that Andrea Gabay is in the fray and fighting hard. And Wendy, it was spectacular as usual. I want to inform people, first of all, that there was recently a disruption of a Senate hearing on the ERA, a nonsense sham Senate hearing by Equal Means Equal. 4 women were arrested. Now, you might say that's a piece of theater. Yes, it is. But let's not forget that it was that kind of theater that started the radical feminist movement for abortion in New York State. It was a disruption, as Anne mentioned, of 12 men and a nun who were deciding for women on abortion, and New York radical women, later Red Stockings, disrupted it. And that got press, and that really started the ball rolling, got it in the public eye. So I really always think of that great campaign called No Business as Usual that went on in parts of the 70s and 80s. I think that's a great phrase. Basically, we have to make it impossible for this society to go on in its usual way, normalizing our oppression by making things that are supposed to normally run, not run, such as disruptions. We have to take those kind of
Bring it
risks.
here and I'll help you fold.
Excuse me?
Oh,
I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Am I cut off again? I don't know what's going
Oh,
on.
keep going, Fran.
keep going.
Okay, so I'm for no business as usual strategy. I'm also for fighting very hard for the ERA.
Thank you.
Somebody needs to mute
You need to
themselves.
mute
Yeah,
someone.
Sandra, Sandra, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah.
There's
All
some
right.
things for him. I don't really feel like driving him back to North Van.
Anne, can you mute her?
I don't really feel like going to I'm not gonna go back to the
Yeah, you're
hospital
gonna
or
have
this
to
building
mute her.
either. I don't know what to do.
Yes.
Guess I'm driving him back to North Van.
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's speaking.
I don't want to run around.
It's
after
Sandra Curry. Can you please mute yourself?
him. I'm hoping he's back in the hospital, but I somehow don't think he is.
Anne, you can't mute her?
Beth, you should be able to mute her.
Just
the
click on her
participants
square,
list.
Ann, and you can.
Sandra.
Okay, now she muted. Let's see, she muted
Okay.
herself.
I don't think so. I think she just stopped talking. Go ahead.
Okay, so the other thing is, I know the next person who has their hand up is Kathy, followed by Darcel. So Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know anything about that RBG history. And I just wanted I wanted to ask you if you would put in the chat or repeat what this case is so I can look into it a little bit more.
I just wanted to finish because I was totally interrupted by that whole disruption.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to finish. I was talking about a no business as usual strategy. I defend Rise Up for Abortion Rights because they are that way. They are not, slowly building abortion funds. And yes, I think all that is important. I think there's a multi-pronged strategy, but history has shown that it's when masses of people get out in the street and the government feels that things are going to get shook up and not proceed as normal, whether it is directly for the ERA, whether it is for abortion rights in general, there's many, many targets. That is when things start to change. That's what really happened in the 30s. We got Social Security out of it. That is what happened in the 60s. We have got to really keep at it by really any means necessary. And that's of course to be debated. So that is basically what I want to say. I think there should be more disruptions for the ERA. I think they should be better publicized. I think that is how you get things in the public eye, and that's absolutely part of this struggle.
You know, Fran makes such a good point, except for the fact that abortion is used as a prop to distract women from the ERA. So I don't want women to focus on abortion. Number one, if we do establish the ERA, we're going to then be able to protect abortion rights. So why would we waste our time focusing on abortion rights when if we just get the ERA done, we have just fixed abortion rights, rebooted the Constitution, and we have a whole new playing field. So I just don't like wasting time. And I think that because the government wants women focused on abortion rights so that we're fighting against each other and I want abortion, I don't, I'm going to vote blue, I'm going to vote red, which is such a waste of time. We are never going to get over the hill of having abortion come and go like the breezes unless we get the ERA in place. So that's why I'm so much attached to Alice Paul. She got it. She was brilliant, 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 brilliant. And she knew the importance of establishing the right to vote and the ERA, and that nothing else mattered more. And that until those two things are done, we should not spend any time or energy on anything, because we will never have the money we need to overcome the corruption that has maintained women's second-class status for both parties' enjoyment for centuries, and it's just gotten worse. We'll never have the money. We'll only have our power in numbers, and that means leveraging a nonpartisan union of women for equality and pressuring both sides with our threat to not vote at all or to vote this way or that way unless they do the right thing. That's, you know, that's, I feel very strongly about that. But all respect, Fran, because I just love what you do.
I just in one sentence, I hear what you're saying. It's a really compelling argument, but I think that for us not to raise a gigantic fuss about what's just happened to abortion would kind of leave a sense of the silence is deafening. There's something wrong with that also. So I think it's going to have to be multi-pronged. That is my opinion.
So let's get back to Kathy's question.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kathy, you asked me about a case. Did you mean
The one that you mentioned right at the end with
okay,
Ginsburg.
Well, so the Ginsburg situation is complicated.
Virginia.
And if you do send me an email, I'll send you my little book on the role RBG played in killing the ERA. That's important.
Okay.
The two cases that are crucial, and I don't think Fran was here for this, but you know, the two cases that really killed the ERA that again RBG participated in were, and not that she participated in Roe, but it was Frontiero, though it came down at the same time. Frontiero versus Richardson from 1973, and of course Roe versus Wade from 1973. Those were crucial. The Dobbs decision, I mentioned the case Geduldig, which says that pregnancy and abortion are not sex-based. That's a case from 1974 whose time has come, and I think we should spend some energy fighting Geduldig and overturning it because it's absurd on its face, and lots of scholars agree with me. If I'm missing anything that you want, and it's not in the little book that I send you, just send me another email and I'll see if I can answer.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. But also, I worry about telling people not to fight for abortion. I think we have the capability of doing both. You just made the most compelling argument I've heard about why the ERA is necessary for abortion. I'm a little concerned about, you know, this right-wing Supreme Court when they get hold of the ERA case. But I think we're capable of doing both.
Well,
And
you know, of course we are, Kathy. That's not the issue. It's not that we're not capable. It's what matters most. And should we focus our energy the way that Alice Paul focused us only on suffrage, even though there were lots of other issues at that time that were very important? And women said, no, we're going to focus all of our resources on the vote, and to the detriment perhaps of other issues that they cared about. If you believe me, and you don't have to, but if you believe me that abortion has been used as a distraction to keep us away from thinking about the ERA, then it's a little bit easier not to spend too much energy in that direction. And if you get sucked into the current abortion debate, you're only going to feel yourself compelled to vote for Democrats and not Republicans. And again, you're getting sucked into this idea that this is a two-party system and one side likes us and the other side doesn't, which is wrong. I mean, it's just not correct. They use abortion to control women, but more importantly, to distract us from fighting for equality, which would fix abortion. So that's the only reason I say it's not worth my time. It doesn't mean that I don't care about abortion. I care very much about it. And there are things I do want to do about abortion, in addition to this, rebooting, if you will, with the ERA, including fighting to overturn Geduldig, which is not about the ERA per se, but it's a way of dismantling Dobbs from the inside. And it's a more complicated and sophisticated thing to do than protesting and getting sidetracked into thinking this is a left-right issue. It really isn't.
Okay, Darcel, you were next, and then Anne.
And then Kathleen Dooley, she was
Yeah,
wondering how to
I'm
raise
so
her hand.
technologically ignorant. I don't know how to raise my hand, but I'm.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
we'll-
I know Darcel has had her hand up for quite a while.
Right.
On
And
the
then
action box on the
this
bottom.
Kathleen can be after Anne then, probably.
Okay, Darcel?
Okay, so one, I want to thank you all for doing this. This is my first time here with one of the FIST conversations, and I have enjoyed it immensely. I have a number of questions, but I'm going to try to shorten it down because the conversation was about abortion. And back 25 years ago, when I was fighting on the streets with a friend of mine who had been fighting on the streets, and she was a young person, said, eventually you'll get tired. You will get tired of this fight. You'll get tired of having to protect the abortion clinics. You'll get tired. I thought, how's that going to happen? Now we've got Roe v. Wade. And then I see it discouraged and gone away. And I'm concerned about the young women today who aren't picking up the fight, because I grew up in upstate New York. I spent a long time in Southern California. Both sides of the country has access to abortion. If I was in the middle of the country, that's not the truth. And so in the conversation about abortion accessibility, it's scary. And so I'm wondering how we bring young people into this conversation of the importance of, you got to fight for your rights. Wendy, your conversation about the ERA, thank you. I hadn't put all the pieces together, but yeah, that was great. So I don't know how we bring the young people into the conversation about either abortion rights or ERA, because so many young women think, the young women I talk to think, we already have it.
Yeah.
We've got it. What's the
Yeah.
problem? What are you complaining about? And that scares me to death. And I will sign off now.
Okay,
I respond, I think I'm next.
One
Yes.
issue I want to respond to Darcel quickly, and I thought maybe Andrea could respond to her as well, since she's obviously the
Right.
young one here. But the quick thing I want to suggest, which was in my notes, I didn't get to it, is, and I think this is vital, is for us as individuals, if we can, to join local school boards, run for school board elections, because that's where we can force, any way possible, but we can force education around women's inequality. You may not get schools to agree that to teach about abortion, but you can teach that women are second-class citizens, that they were excluded from the 14th Amendment, that that they had to fight to get the right to vote. They're still fighting for equality. You can teach about the ERA, teach that it hasn't been attached to the Constitution yet. There is no school district in this country that teaches anything about women's legal status, even at the college level, unless you're lucky, and even at the law school level, although I teach it to my students. When I was in law school, nobody taught me that women were second-class citizens. We learned a little bit about intermediate scrutiny, but not its meaning. So we need to get young people to think when they're young, the same way they learn about critical race theory and all kinds of issues about the history of slavery and racism.
I'm gonna throw an interesting thing out to you right now. I'm about 20 minutes away from Seneca Falls, New York.
Oh,
You
soon
know,
to be
some of y'all might know what that
Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yes, I love her.
equal rights and everything, all of that stuff was right there in my backyard growing up. I'm 64 now. I was never taught this.
Exactly.
And the kids that are growing up today aren't being taught this. And we're talking about in my backyard, we had the women's right movement. We had so much history. And we just don't talk about women who do historical famous things.
We don't tell people that they're not equal. How is that even possible? How do you not teach
Yeah.
that to
Okay, so I'd like
I
to go
didn't mean to
to,
interrupt you. I'll
I'd like to
stop
say-
now.
so
Yeah,
I'd like to go to see if Andrea wants to address anything on this.
and then I
thank
had my
you.
hand up. Yeah,
No,
Yeah, I'll pass it to you, Anne, after.
no, you-
Um,
okay.
Great, yeah. So, I mean, I think, Wendy, that is a great thing that I was also going to bring up, just because it is something that there are a lot of just social activism issues that not even just women's, but because this is a women's forum, that those are important things that we are not taught in schools. And it blows my mind because these are things that we've had to find ourselves, and it is important to do your own research. But again, we have to think about how many people may not know what they don't know, right? So that's something that's important. And I think for the youth, again, I'm in that circle, so it's hard for me to be like, oh, I don't hear this for that one. But there are a lot of people, I think, from moving from New York City to San Diego, here I actually grew up here in San Diego, and moving back, I forget that a lot of us are kind of in a more, New York City has just so many diversity of issues and people, and you learn so many things being in these different circles. Whereas in maybe places like San Diego, we fortunately, a lot of people do live in like the comforts, and if they're not, then they're made privy to these issues, right? But if you're not already suffering from it, you're not learning from it, you're not involved in these types of groups, then that's where maybe women of our younger generation are not really thinking. And we're lucky to be in California, where we're like, oh yeah, I don't really have to think about that. I don't really have to think about that issue because I'm not burdened with that sort of thing. But I think the conversation needs to start by, again, from the ground up, when it starts with people like me. When we want to be involved in these issues, we want to bring it back. We start inviting friends. I've got a lot of friends to come out to these sort of events, keep talking about these issues, bring it up to the media, so that people are also like, what is that thing that they keep talking about? They keep going on these streets, and what is that? Getting that news coverage, because it's super important to do that. And again, having those conversations with your friends. So with the youth, I don't know, it's stuff like TikTok, hoping to have influencers like that. It could come from an influencer level, maybe, where we start just bringing them on platforms and talking about these issues and just continuing that fight. And again, just like through social circles, talking about these issues and bringing that up. That's one of the
Okay.
ways I can also think. Yeah.
Okay, so Anne and then Kathleen.
Yeah. So a couple things. I appreciate all the wonderful work Wendy's done around the ERA, and I agree that it's extremely important. And I also agree that neither party is a friend to women, and have demonstrated that time and time again. But I do believe in a multi-issue approach here. I think these issues are very interconnected, and I think we have to raise the abortion rights issue as well. And I think that our power, our ultimate power, and I'm a lawyer, so I work in the courts, and I don't understate how important that is, but I do think that our bigger power is our independent movement. And that's the movement that can even reach out to young people, because we didn't learn in school. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, we didn't learn women's history at all. We had to rediscover it. We didn't even know there was, anything. And so our movement, when we're organized, when we're in the streets, when we're fighting back, that's what raises the consciousness. That what changes the dynamic, and even can make the Supreme Court take us seriously, at least to some degree. So, and it gives us more impact when we fight in the courts. So I believe in a multi-issue approach of working for women's rights and the whole platform for women's liberation, and seeing, connecting the dots between the two, all the issues that are important to women.
Well, and I want to agree with you quickly, Anne, that that even though I would I'm Alice Paul, and I would put all my eggs in one basket, and I would be fierce about it, and unapologetic. What I do think we can all do, regardless of how we feel about different strategies, is always frame every bit of women's suffering in a constitutional light, whether it's violence and abuse or abortion, unequal pay. Always talk about it with the constitutional part there. The reason this is happening is because the Constitution causes it to happen by not allowing women to claim equality in any context ever under any laws. They can't guarantee equal treatment when they get a license for their dog. They can't guarantee equal treatment when they complain about unequal pay. They can't guarantee equal access to justice when they get raped and beaten. Every single one of these harms that women suffer is directly tied to their constitutional inequality. And whatever we're doing in this adventure, we can always hook those two ideas together. I constitutionalize everything, every lawsuit, every case I have, everything I write about. I'm writing a book right now about women who invented, discovered, or created things that a man took credit for. And I've got constitutional stuff throughout it, even though I don't have to have it in there. I do it because I can. And we need to do it because we can. Everything
Yes.
is constitutional, everything.
Yeah, I think the one thing
Yeah.
about the Constitution is that it has staying power. And I mean, Roe v. Wade had 50 years of staying power, though it got eroded. But the Constitution has the most staying power.
Right.
That's
Not
right.
just interpreting a
Yeah,
Constitution, but
exactly.
actually being in the Constitution.
That's
Which makes a
right.
huge difference. So I agree with that, but I do agree. I do think there should be a multi-issue approach.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
Kathleen.
Oh, thank you. So I can't believe we're here having this discussion. I'm 63 years old. When I was 9 years old, my father called me a bra burner. And he said, you were a bra burner before you even had a bra. Okay, so here we are. I'm a lawyer. For 30 years, I've sat across from deposition tables with people telling me the horse should taste like applesauce. But a 19-year-old daughter who's running away from womanhood like a house on fire. All right.
Yeah.
So I am angry. And Wendy, I really, I'm holding on to what you're saying, but I have to say this after Dobbs, Facebook, shit, I hate that thing. But anyway, people are saying, oh, pregnant people no longer have rights. And I said, pregnant people? Women no longer have rights. Well, I got pounded on.
Wow.
And I believe friends of mine on Facebook said, you need to be more inclusive. So I think part of the struggle, bringing women together on this, is there are women that are drinking the goddamn Kool-Aid. Okay.
Yeah.
They're
Amen.
They're telling me you're not being inclusive. Well, my kids are biracial. Okay, we're a biracial family. I think I am inclusive. And I'm sorry, but the only people who give birth are women. So,
Yeah, right.
And by the way, I was raised, I had 19 years of Catholic education. I survived, but nuns were the most influential people in my life. And they taught me about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
All right.
Raised me on this, and God bless them for doing
I
that.
kind of none.
And so yeah, I think we should focus. I don't want to be a one-issue voter. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but they're fucking pissing me off right now. But I think we do have to focus, and we should channel Alice Paul. We should. But how do we convert those women who are actually working against us?
So Kathleen, first of all, I agree with you. Everybody I know who cares about this gender versus sex issue totally supports transgender people. My doctor is transgender. I have transgender people in my family, but that doesn't mean that my transgender doctor thinks she's biologically female. She doesn't. She totally gets it. She's a doctor. But my point about organizing a union for women's equality will, I believe, help to grow the voices of the women who keep saying sex-based rights matter, because right now we have nothing. There is no leadership for women in this country that cares about sex-based rights with any substance. In other words, there are small groups, but the bigger ones don't. The National Organization for Women, when they were founded in 1966 at their first national convention, they declared that they were there to oppose and fight against the ERA. People don't even know this about them. They have been harmful in many ways that are hard to see, but they've been harmful to the cause. The feminist majority, same thing. National Women's Law Center, same thing. We don't have a large group of women as women. And I'm not even saying we can't let others join in and be supporters, but when Black Lives Matter fights, they care about the unity of their cause and the ability to see Blackness as the core nature of their fight, right? We don't
oppression.
have that. We've got women's groups saying, like for the Women's March in 2017, the speakers were forbidden to talk about the ERA. Forbidden.
I know.
Forbidden.
I was there. Yeah, I know.
And they talked about everything that had nothing to do with women.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah, okay, Fran, I think had her hand
Organized
up next.
as women.
Okay, yeah. All right, the first thing I want to, I hope I'm not muted now. The first thing I want to say is that I produce a radio show that's a feminist show on WBAI, which is terrestrial radio, not a podcast, broadcast to 3 states. And both Anne and Wendy and others here have been on the show. Okay, why am I bringing this up? Because we're a lonely outpost of not saying pregnant people, saying pregnant women. A lot of my guests will say pregnant people. I won't dispute them. They are my guests, but I will repeat what they said and say pregnant women. And it's just like ongoing sort of tension, but I insist on maintaining it and everything that goes along with that. So I just want to make people aware of the show because I like your support for this kind of show. It really is very rare. We're on WBAI radio, and we stream at WBAI.org, WBAI.org. We're on at 11 a.m. on Thursdays right now. And the show really needs your support. We really are in a minority position on the issues we cover. We're surrounded by shows that love surrogacy of women and sex work and all kinds of stuff that FIST and radical feminists really don't like, and we need you to call into the show and give your opinions, and we take phone calls, etc. I just posted that on the chat. I hope you take it seriously because we can easily be knocked out of the game, and there really is nothing like us. Okay, a little bit of history. The original demand in New York State was for abortion was not the Roe kind of law that we got in New York State. It was for repeal of all abortion laws. Okay, a woman named Cindy Sizzler, who was very big, very leading in that campaign, correctly said that the kinds of laws that were coming in, which were Roe-type laws, left giant loopholes that the right would come and fill in and take the rights away little by little, which is exactly what happened. The whole thing about, you after the second trimester, you can't have an abortion, etc. So that, of course, got increased. The time in which you're not allowed to have an abortion got increased under Casey, etc. So we wound up with most women not even having access even before Roe was overturned because they had chipped away at it so much. And if we had gone for repeal, what we really wanted, we could have possibly avoided that. The movement was very strong at that time. When Nelson Rockefeller was the governor of New York, let that abortion law go through in New York, he said, I had to do it or those repeal people would have prevailed. He was saying that we got whatever we got because the radical demand scared the shit out of them. So there's a really big lesson there to go for what you really want, not make accommodations with what's supposed to be, realistic. So I wanted to add that to history, and I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes. I really thank all of you, and I hope you will very shortly be on The Joy of Resistance. Wendy, once again, Anne coming up soon. And we did broadcast Kamala Lopez and the women who disrupted the Senate hearing on behalf of the ERA only 2 weeks ago. And you can actually hear that if you go to the archives in BAI and you look for the last show we did, which this past Thursday.
And by the
Didn't
way,
actually hear that
can I just-
disruption. What?
tack one thing on to what you just said, Fran, about the hearing. The day of the Senate hearing on the ERA bill, which wasn't a bill, it was a resolution, which are meaningless. It's kind of like, you know, a bill to declare National, Bird Day. It was a resolution, and it was scheduled for the purpose of distracting us from the fact that the DC court's appellate decision where Biden was arguing against the ERA came down at the same time. They were scheduled to coincide with each other. And no surprise.
Cynical.
While the hearing, no, seriously though,
Yeah.
the hearing was going on.
No, it's a cynical.
Yeah,
There was a cynical move on their part, I mean.
Oh, yeah, but so predictable because
Yeah.
and I was in a phone call with Senator Whitehouse's chief of staff and legal counsel and a couple of other advocates for the ERA the week before the Senate hearing, because we wanted Whitehouse to say certain things during the hearing. He was on the Constitutional Committee. And I said, you know, most people think this is kind of a joke hearing because number one, it's a resolution, which means it has no value. Number two, it's likely to come down on the same day as the DC appellate decision when we lose the ERA in that case. And they said, oh, no, why would you think that? Because, you know, that case has been pending for so long. Why would it come down the same day? And it did. It was so predictable. But the most important thing I want to say is, so the Senate got enormous public attention. All the media covered the Senate hearings, right? Very little attention to the fact that we had just lost this case on the ERA in the DC appellate court, and zero, absolutely zero news coverage of the fact that Biden was the opponent who won that DC case when he successfully argued against the ERA's validity, right? Zero public attention. So the Senate gets to cloud our airwaves with this argument that the Democrats love women's equality, while the chief Democrat had just killed the ERA in the second highest court in the land. And you know what that Senate resolution said that got all this positive attention? Women should vote for Democrats because look what we're doing for the ERA. You know what the resolution said? The ERA is valid because the deadline is not valid. No. The ERA is valid because 3/4 of the states have ratified it. They just wanted to issue a declaration of its validity. And then there was a second paragraph below it that said, we also want to recognize that 5 states have rescinded the ERA.
Oh, God.
Okay, so
Which is
just want to tell you, it's 2:47 now. I think we have 2 more people who wanted to speak. We have Ann and then Carol, but Ann is next.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to say that the repeal of all abortion laws at that time was absolutely the right demand. But when you think about staying power, though, repealing a law doesn't mean it's not going to get written.
right.
And so that's why you need the constitutional protections as strong as possible to give something staying power. Actually, Roe v. Wade, for all its limitations, had staying power more than a repeal of a particular law, because those laws can be rewritten and passed again. So I just wanted to make that one point.
But not full staying power.
They had to kill Roe slowly, sliver by sliver, but it was so predictable. When you know the history, when you know that Roe was decided in order to kill the ERA, and if you believe that, which I do, then you know it was going to get killed eventually, and it did.
Yeah.
Okay, so Carol?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to, in the chat, I did put the case that Wendy mentioned, the Geduldig v. Aiello case, and I also put in there a link to our page on the website. That's the ERA action page, and we have a campaign right now. We're calling Joe Biden and demanding that he pick up the phone and tell the archivist to publish the ERA. He can do that with one phone call, and he's refusing to do that. But on that page, there's several things you can do, and there's a nice little brochure that Wendy helped write. Wendy basically wrote, and I kind of, helped a little bit is more the case on that action page. And the link is right there in the chat. And to save the chat, in case you don't know, you just have to go down to the little ellipsis down at the bottom next to the happy face to the right, the 3 dots to the happy face. If you click on that, it says save the chat, and you can save the links and stuff that people have put in there, and then you can save it to your own computer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. For
Okay,
putting that
thank
in
you.
there.
I think what I want,
Can I say one quick thing, Beth? I
yes,
just want people to remember that we still do have 3 lawsuits pending in state courts. And by the way, this is for Darcel. My plaintiff in the federal case in 2020 was Kamala Lopez's Equal Means Equal group. The new plaintiff in the 3 state lawsuits is the Elizabeth Cady Stanton Trust. And Colleen Jenkins, who's the great-great-granddaughter of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, is similarly fiercely nonpartisan, happy to do whatever it takes to get the ERA done. And so it's her organization that's serving as the plaintiff in these 3 state cases. So if you want to check them out, they're just a wonderful organization. And that's for you, Darcel, that they've been working hard, even though nothing's being taught in schools. They're doing as much as they can to educate.
You do
Still,
talk
after
about
all
it
this time.
locally.
Yeah,
You talk about it locally.
They're really
A
the
little
only, the legacy of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in terms of the continuity of each generation continuing to fight for the ERA. They're the only group that I know of that has started with suffrage and continued generation after generation to fight for what Alice Paul was talking about from the beginning. So they're still lingering and they're still fighting. And that does give me hope.
okay, I don't know if there's any final words, particularly from people who haven't said anything. So,
Well,
Carol said,
we just want to thank all 3 of the speakers. You did a great job. Thank you so much, Andrea. I just wanted to say one quick thing that, I think we can work on all these things. I agree with Wendy, ERA, and Anne, that ERA is the, uppermost, most, absolutely most important thing. But when we're working on these other issues, we need to bring in the fact that we don't have equal standing in the Constitution. Like Wendy was saying, constitutionalize it. Whenever you protest, make sure you get that in there, because that's the core problem.
Yep.
okay,
Framing.
And I wanted to say that
Thanks,
encouraging women to join Feminists in Struggle. We're trying to build a grassroots movement that's going to address all these issues of lack of constitutional equality and all the discrimination we're facing right now, and the horror of making abortion illegal. Fighting for our rights as women, sex-based rights in every arena, and creating an independent women's movement. So if you're interested in joining, it's feministinstruggle.org, and you can see our website. And
Have you put a link to join FIST on the chat for any of us who don't know?
Yeah.
good idea.
Yeah, just go to feministstruggle.org and you'll see a join us tab, and just click on that and you can join us by filling that out.
And I would say one other thing, and that is to give kudos to Andrea, who is an incredible grassroots organizer.
Yeah.
I have met her in January. They have an opportunity to work
Yes.
together with her in coalition, and looking forward to more grassroots feminist organizing going on here.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
give us
it's
hope,
so-
Andrea. You give us
Yeah.
hope.
Yes,
Good, good.
exactly. So nice to see a
Yeah.
nice young person involved in learning all about this stuff. Thank you so much, Andrea. You did a
Yeah.
great job. You're very articulate.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Wendy and Anne and Andrea for, it was a very good discussion. I think a lot of people brought up some interesting points. So
We do, just one other point is we do have an ongoing forums program. We've had, oh God, I don't even know how many forums we've had since COVID hit, when we had to cancel our conference. But we've had a bunch of different forums on various topics, everything from the ERA to sex-based rights to abortion to all kinds of things
To-
on different subjects. So
Also, people
To-
who are outside of the US, like you had one on women in
Poland, women in Poland,
Oh.
right? That was really.
Oh, yeah, and talking about a global issue, the forum that we did on the global oppression of women, the role of patriarchal religion in the global oppression of women. That's a forum that you can also view. That's a video on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look for feministstruggle.org. You'll see all of our own
Yeah.
videos and then all of our recommended ones as well by other people.
Okay,
All right.
so I'd like to basically end this meeting.
All right. Well, thanks
very
for
good.
sharing.
Our time is up, yes.
Right on time.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank
Okay,
you. all.
bye. Bye.
Okay,
everyone.
thank you, Wendy, Andrea.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.